So, so for our first topic tonight, we're going to dig into transgender issues, which is something that, as I'm sure we're all aware, has been really in the news a lot lately. There's been a lot of issues in laws at state levels, and I think policies at schools, and I think in general, people who do not identify in what might be considered traditional ways with gender. Have kind of a tough time in integrating with society. And so I thought this is something that, man, it connects with Wikipedia in so many different ways. Number one, gender, just even binary gender, is a big challenge with Wikipedia. We have way more male editors than female editors. And when you add transgender into the mix, you have very few transgender editors who are trying to make sure that that issues that are very close to their heart are represented accurately and fairly on Wikipedia. But then also just many of the issues that transgender people encounter in day-to-day life also come up on Wikipedia. So people are often marginalized for if maybe they're considered too closely connected to a topic. So even though you know a lot about it because you live it every day, some people might feel that means you should never touch a Wikipedia article because you can't be neutral about it. So I thought it would be a really great opportunity to discuss some of these things. The initial idea for this, Wayne brought in Chris Lysagan, which I'm hoping I said the name fairly close to accurately, who has written these two books that you see up at the front. Please feel free to look through them, and I think they're available for purchase as well if you like what you see. And then that sort of expanded. We were just originally going to do a little one-on-one interview, but as we got into it, we realized there are some other voices that we could maybe add into the mix. So Pax Ahimsa Gethin, who uses the gender-neutral pronoun they or them, is a Wikipedian and also came to the Wikipedia 15th birthday event in January, and so I think is going to introduce the issue a bit for us. They have a very helpful perspective in kind of bridging these worlds with a sort of a foot in both the Wikipedia world and the transgender world. And Chris's husband, Herb, is a psychiatrist who deals with children around gender issues, and I think can really help us out with sort of some science around all of the things that we're talking about here. So let's start off. I want to really keep our introduction pretty brief because we don't have a ton of time to work with. We do have two panels or two presentations we want to do today. So we're going to have a brief presentation from each, and then we'll just jump right in with questions. So please be thinking about anything you'd like to ask or comment about. When we get to questions, we have a microphone over in the back. You're welcome to just step up and use that, or we might be able to pass one of these around as well. So without further ado, Pax, can you get us started?
Great, thanks for that introduction. Yeah, so I am Pax. I'm a queer trans blogger and photographer. I've been an editor on Wikipedia for about 7 years now, but only really became really active fairly recently. I've been working along a lot of pages on the Wiki Project LGBT studies, basically trying to improve coverage of trans people, gender non-conforming people, non-binary people, especially, are pretty much invisible in a world that basically sees everybody is either a man or woman, male or female. And
can I just ask real quick?
Sure.
You mentioned Wiki Project. Is Wiki Project a term everyone knows, or like raise your hand if you don't know what a Wiki Project is? So maybe you could just give a quick description of what that is.
Sure. Well, this is the only one I've really participated on, so I'm certainly not an expert on it. But basically, it's just anyone who wants to volunteer to help out in coverage of a particular area. There's a page specifically for the project for discussion where editors can talk about pages that are having some problems, ask for advice on editing, linking to these pages, and so on. So it's just basically anybody who wants to do it can sign up. There's no, actual official policy involved. So yeah, basically I've just realized in the course of my editing that people really don't have basic knowledge of what it really means to be transgender. I mean, to most people, I think transgender either means Caitlyn Jenner or a man in a dress. And the latter is hopefully to most of the people in this room, you realize that that's not accurate, but the former really isn't accurate either. I am, absolutely nothing like Caitlyn Jenner. I am agender, actually. I don't have a gender, but for legal and medical purposes, I have transitioned from female to male. So legally, I am male. But I just want to give a rundown on some basic terms. This is a slide from a presentation that I just gave a month ago at a social justice conference where I was talking mostly to vegans and animal rights activists, but just giving a general overview of gender topics. So basically, a transgender person does not identify with the sex they were assigned at birth. Basically, when you're born, they say it's a boy or it's a girl basically just by looking between your legs, and that's about the extent of it. But basically a trans person at some point during their childhood or adult life realizes that that was not an accurate assessment, and that's all it means to be transgender. It has nothing to do with your legal status or what kind of body or chromosomes you have. That's all there is to it.
And I think when we talked about this before about a week ago, I think you made the point that it's that really transgender is very much an umbrella term, right? So there might be people who are very intent on getting surgery to actually modify their body to fit their beliefs, and there might be other or their identity. There might be other people to whom that doesn't really matter and that's not important, but they identify with a certain gender regardless of. And so this was actually news to me. I learned something. I learned something, and it made me feel a little better about communicating about it, because it's just an umbrella term for all of those, and there are many different ways that people relate within that.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. Yeah, being transgender does not mean that you have had or want to have surgery necessarily. Same with hormones. You can be transgender. Basically, it's just about identity. It's how you identify. It's not related to any particular medical procedures or even legal status, because some people can't afford to get, legal change of sex or gender. So a cisgender person, and this has been really controversial, I'm reverting on the Wikipedia page constantly. There's been a lot of vandalism to this one. But a cisgender person does identify with the sex they were assigned at birth. That's all. It's not a slur. It's not short for sissy. It's not an acronym. It's from the Latin cis, on the same side of, as opposed to trans on the other side of. That's it. It's not naming someone's gender identity. It's just saying that they agree with the gender they were assigned at birth. That's all there is to it. A non-binary person identifies as something other than male or female, man or woman. So for example, as I had mentioned, I'm agender. I don't have a gender. There are people who are bigender. There are two genders. People who are gender queer. That's another one. Basically, some binary people, but not all, identify as gender queer. That means basically their gender is, again, something other than male or man, female or woman. And these are both umbrella terms. So, part of what I've been doing on Wikipedia is trying to, explain to people that these are valid identities and they exist, because again, there's been a lot of vandalism on the genderqueer and the cisgender pages, not just trolling, but really seriously harmful things for people to read. And it's been really stressful for me to read, but I feel like it's even more stressful, for young trans people, who might be Googling to find out about trans issues, and Wikipedia is the first thing that comes up. When you're Googling, you see, zero results pages that come up on Google and some other browsers, and they're going to see these hateful things being said about trans people or non-binary people. So I feel like, as painful as it is for me personally to read this stuff, I have my watch list open and I'm constantly looking at it because of this. So it's a real challenge.
So I think if it's okay, that seems like a great segue to Herb, who can probably speak to the issues of what it's like for someone, maybe a child or maybe someone who doesn't have a lot of information, going to something like Wikipedia and getting information that's maybe inaccurate or offensive, etc.
Well, first of all, I'm a child psychiatrist. I've been here for 35 years. Can people in the back hear me? It's working. Little what? This like that? This is as loud as I can speak, so raise your hand if you can't hear me. Okay, so I've been seeing kids for 35, 40 years in child psychiatry. I've been at Children's Hospital for a very long time, and always there was a smattering of little boys who were effeminate that came into the clinic. In about 1994, 95, I started seeing kids coming in saying, not that they thought they might want to be a girl when they grow up, but that they were a girl now. And this was a new phenomenon. We didn't see many of those kids, but gradually over the 2000s, we started seeing many more. And then something happened. The DSM, the infamous DSM, Statistical Manual of the American Psychiatric Association, was revising its book. And the head of the Committee on Gender Issues was a guy from Toronto who wanted to keep the term gender identity disorder. There were a number of professionals, such as myself, who felt that these kids were not disordered. If anything, quite the opposite. My experience with these kids was amazing. And that got into the public debate because we were pushing people on the committee not to go along with this. And that meant, that brought out not only activists in the profession, it brought out parents who were saying, you're not going to give my kid a disorder. This is not a disordered child. And that battle was won. The book came out in 2013. There are basically 3 ways to approach transgender children. And in the early years, we mainly see boys who say there are girls. Girls come much later into adolescence. So boys outnumber girls early on 6-1, and in adolescence, it's even. It's pretty clear why that is. We saw many proto-gay boys and many fewer lesbian to be children. For the same reason, it's very easy to be a tomboy. Nobody's going to make a big deal about it.
Can I ask real quick? This may be too complex to give a simple answer to. So if so, just say so. But I'm just curious. I think like to have something a little more concrete to wrap my head around. Like, what is it like? How does it usually manifest for a child? How do they bring up the topic? Right? They've always been referred to as a girl their whole life, or as a boy, and then there's something that they need to express. How does that usually get expressed?
Okay, so I'll answer that question and then go into where I was going, which is about how we deal with these kids. We have lots of 2.5-year-olds that tell their mothers that I have a penis and when is God going to come and take it away? And they tell their mothers that they're boys. The youngest kid whose gender and name I changed was a 5-year-old. This kid kept telling his mother that, and she was a PhD. They live up way northern California, and she said, oh, don't worry, you're going to grow out of it. It's just a phase, because that's what pediatricians were telling parents. And the kid stopped coming out to play. He went to his room. I should say her room now. And at some point, the parents were very concerned. At some point, the kid said to mom, he said, Mommy, you probably wonder why I don't come out and play anymore. And she said, yes, I would really like to know why you don't come out and play anymore. She said, because in my room is the only place where I can be who I am. Those kids will tell you not that someday they want to grow up to be a girl, but they are a girl now. That's one of the criteria we use in allowing kids to transition. There are 3 approaches. I'm really going through a lot of stuff very quickly. There's an approach that says you should help these children not persist in demanding that their gender is other, and that you should take them into therapy to help them figure out what problem in their life they're trying to solve by being of the opposite gender. That was the position of the director of that DSM-5 committee. There's another group, and these are all the clinics in Europe, that says it's okay, you shouldn't try to change these kids, but don't let them change now. You have to wait until they're more firm in what they're committed to. The Bay Area, some people call us cowboys. We're very into allowing kids that we really think are going to persist to transfer over to being the other gender. The victory that was just achieved, and I have an article that I did in the Chronicle a month ago with a colleague, was that the clinic in Toronto where Ken Zucker was proposing that you try and convert these kids was forcibly um, um, we allow kids to change their gender literally at age 5 if we think they're appropriate. And I want to say that we have scales for doing this. We don't just allow a kid to come in and say, I want to be a girl, and let them be a girl. In fact, I have a paper up here for people if they want to see it that came out this month that looks at the psychological health of kids allowed to transition under the age of 10. And their psychological status is no different from the general population. And if they were depressed before they were allowed to transition, they now become completely healthy kids. Okay? The clinic in Toronto was closed. The clinic in Amsterdam continues to have these kids not express themselves by going to school dressed as a girl, for example, until they can start puberty. And there's a wonderful picture that came out in Germany about 6 months ago where a little boy was allowed to go to school dressed as a girl, and the school said, no, you're a little boy, you have to dress as a girl. And the next day there's a picture of the little boy walking to school in a dress, and his father is walking by his side in a dress. It's a very endearing picture. The study indicates that we can do this when we pick right. We can allow these kids to transition early. And the other form of therapy, which has been touted, has been shown to be harmful. So the Toronto clinic had 2 times the amount of psychopathology as the Amsterdam clinic and 3 times the amount of suicidal ideation in the kids.
Can I just ask a question based on what Pete was getting at? Sorry, I think there is a misconception that when you say transition, these kids are having surgery, and that's not the case, right? I mean, these kids might be on hormone blockers to delay puberty, but you're not going to have genital surgery or reassignment surgery generally for a young child before they're at age 18, at least not in the United States, correct?
Yeah. So the transition is dress and name and gender, followed by when puberty starts, blocking puberty so they don't develop secondary sexual characteristics, followed about 3 to 4 years later with cross-sex hormones, and then and only then if you want surgery. In Europe, they insisted that all of the sex organs of the natal sex be taken out before you could do this. That was also a victory won. You no longer need to do that. Chris, where are you, my dear?
So I think we're about to have, so the screen is going to come back down. It's the screen needed a little exercise, so we're letting it go through its routine. And we're going to see, I believe, a short video that Chris has of her work. So, and then after that, we'll just jump right into questions.
So the best way for me to show you my work is through photographs. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me? Yes? So I'm going to show you a very short introduction with photos and some text. It's mainly going to be about my latest book. In 2001, just 2 days before September 11, I moved to England from Norway, where I'm from, and I started studying photography, and I've been I was working as a journalist in Oslo, Norway, and when I moved to Birmingham, UK, I met some gender fluid people, and ever since that time, I have been very, very interested in gender identity, and I can't seem to stop. So 2 books that I've written, and this is a short introduction about, yeah, it's very, very brief though. It's just a very heavy subject. So yeah, but you can play it now. Thank you.
That's a pretty powerful piece you've put together there. So I think our schedule is started. We're already coming near the end of the time that we had allotted for this. So I have one question that I think is a very, kind of gets really to the heart of what I'd like to talk about here. I'd like to ask my question, and maybe we can take one or two from the audience. But let's try to get through these as briefly as we can, and use this as we can continue to discuss this after our next panel in side discussions, et cetera. So let's kind of set the table a little more now. But my question is, this is something that I run into frequently editing Wikipedia and talking to other people editing Wikipedia, is that there are certain topics where, like, Wikipedia has a fairly rigid idea of what constitutes solid sourcing and you know, when you're writing an article, what constitutes authority. So for something like transgender, I think we have really like sort of three major and different kinds of expertise. We have one person who lives in a transgender world every day, whose experience maybe derives mostly from personal experience. We have someone whose perspective is as a journalist, and someone whose perspective is as a clinical psychiatrist. So could each of you maybe talk a little bit about what that branch of expertise could and should bring to something like Wikipedia? And how you see, in sort of an ideal world, how topics related to transgender should be reflected on Wikipedia, how they should view the kind of expertise that you bring, and maybe a bit in relation to the other forums.
This could take an hour, but I'll make it brief. Yeah, one of my biggest frustrations, you know, working on trans articles and speaking with editors, most of whom are cisgender, is the charge that I'm an activist, you know, and that I have to speak from a neutral point of view and use reliable sources, and I agree with all that, but trans and non-binary people are not well represented in what are considered reliable sources on Wikipedia. And what is considered a neutral point of view is the point of view of a straight cis male. I mean, that is where we're going, you know, at least on the English Wikipedia, at least editing articles related to the United States. So it's a big challenge. But, you know, yes, I am an activist. I have no choice but to be an activist if I want people to recognize my identity as a non-binary person who uses non-binary pronouns. I have to out myself all the time. That's the reality of my life. So I'm not saying that we need to just throw all the policies out the window, but I just want, you know, cisgender people to recognize that what they are calling neutral and reliable is from their perspective, you know, and they need to realize that there are other people out there and our perspectives are valid as well.
I'd imagine there's also probably an aspect of the evolving field, right? People might be citing sources. They're saying, well, you're not an expert, you're not a scientist, so I'm going to cite this source. But if it's something from the 1930s, maybe you might actually be a better expert on that point than so.
No, just briefly. I mean, I'm not saying, you know, I'm going to cite my blog or anything. That's obviously not appropriate, but, you know, lived experience is lived experience. I mean, there is no substitute for that. So I just, you know, want people to recognize that, you know, the charge of being an activist when you're covering something that if you're not transgender or non-binary, you really can't personally know is a little bit unfair. That's all.
First of all, just to give you a sense of the prevalence, in a very careful study done on the East Coast, it turns out that 1 in 200 people in this country are trans. That's an incredible number of people. And these people were next to invisible. I mean, the first surgery was done in 1921 in Germany, but after that, everything went underground. There's an enormous database about this topic in the psychiatric, psychological literature, but there are still, as I mentioned, there are still debates going on, and those debates have been fruitful. And I consider myself an activist because I felt wrong was being done in the field by colleagues of mine, the way they treated these kids. So I mix activism with, I think, and hope, solid research. And lastly, I think it's really important that the voice of the people that we're talking about being involved, one of the things that's happened in our group, and particularly with me, is that these kids are teaching me a lot about what they are and who they are. So that we really were operating in a binary system, and the spectrum of people, kids, little kids coming in, telling me that they are different from that is just it's both rewarding and astounding.
Yeah, so I was going to say that I feel very uncomfortable doing events without having one of the people from my book participating. And so I always try to have at least one person who's been to prison and who can be there with me. And when Pete said that he was going to bring Pax for the meeting, I was very pleased. I would feel uncomfortable talking about it too much without involving a person who is with another gender or no gender. So I think this I don't have experience with Wikipedia's editing. I use Wikipedia a lot for all kinds of things. So I think what we need to do is to let people like Pax and their community edit or be more involved. I think that's the answer.
Okay, well, that's a great intro. I'd love to take some questions from the audience. Is there anyone who has a question or a comment on anything we've had so far? There's a microphone on the side, or if you're close, we can just pass one over. Mikey? We're recording, so.
Hello. So I just want to say this is as informative as it is heartbreaking, by the way, all the like the facts and say and this is a incredibly mundane question about like inside baseball, but when you were talking about the cisgender and genderqueer articles, like there's like a vandalism war going on, and it sounded like just from your tone that hadn't been as much of a problem on the transgender page. Is that true, or around that, like, is this some type of defense mechanism that people would be more upset about the definition of cisgender than what's going on in the transgender editing?
Yeah, I've definitely found that to be the case. Even though cisgender is now even in the Merriam-Webster dictionary, there is a lot of pushback from people who say, I'm not cisgender, I'm just normal. That's the normal edit that is made to the page. That's not just total trolling and profanity. Cisgender is just normal. I think people realize, that transgender exists and there's not nearly as much vandalism on that page, but people just feel like, it's not appropriate to label a condition that they don't consider to be a condition. So I think at this point, the genderqueer page is under permanent pending changes protection, which means that, for those who don't know, that changes made by anonymous or new editors are not seen by the general public, but I still see them because I'm logged in. The cisgender page has temporary pending changes protection, which keeps expiring, and the vandalism keeps piling up regardless, so it's very frustrating. But yeah, part of the point of the LGBT Studies Project is to monitor pages like this because they are all highly targeted by vandals. So yeah.
Can I just follow? So vandalism is something that's come up a number of times, and I think we have some people here who are not frequent Wikipedia editors. Vandalism can really run like pure vandalism is generally when people like blank out entire sections or just put in nonsense words or something like that. But then there are people who have a point of view that is very much at odds with what's reflected in the Wikipedia article and are just pushy about it, and there's a whole range in between. So when you say vandalism, kind of which are you talking about, the whole range or?
Sure. No, thanks for clarifying. Yeah, there's a whole range. The cisgender page, 4 times in the last 2 days has been blanked with things posted that I won't even repeat on there. But there is also what would more accurately be called just disruptive editing rather than pure vandalism, with people, again, just saying, cisgender is just normal. And, for the genderqueer page, a common thing that people say is that these are all autistic teenagers from Tumblr. Basically, that's the kind of thing that I mean, not just, pure blanking the page, but we get that too. I mean, all kinds of pages get that. So I'm not saying that these are special in that regard, but it's just, when you're living that life, it's really hard to be confronted with that day after day. And eventually I'm probably going to have to take a wiki break because of it. But yeah, that's where we're at now.
Yeah, we got the green light on. And if you come over here, you will be on camera, just so you know. Hi, Pax, and thank y'all. This has been great. My name's Keegan. I am born, raised, and still live in the American South. I had the good fortune to grow up in, I hate to use the labels, but, a liberal household. My position towards all things LGBT have been, whatever, live your life. I'm great with it. Unfortunately, that's not the state of affairs for the general population that I've grown up with. People that are friends of mine. And the subject doesn't come up a lot. People aren't comfortable with it. They don't know. And their opinions are often rooted deeply in their faith. But when it does come up, I certainly don't pretend to ignore, or I don't ignore hateful things and comments. And I do my best to fight back, or not to fight back, but to inform a little better and to use proper language and to let people know that they're talking about other humans. Are there any resources that you found useful to help me as cisgender to be a better ally, other than just kind of winging it on my own?
Sure, thank you. I really appreciate you asking that. I mean, real allyship is asking questions like that and not just, putting a rainbow icon on your page or whatever. So thank you. On my blog, funcrunch.org, I have a list of resources that I feel comfortable recommending, and maybe we can put that on the talk page for the event later so that people can link to it, because they're, if you just Google it, which, some people say because, it's exhausting being an educational resource all the time, but then you're going to get mostly things written by cisgender people. So I have tried to point people just to resources written by trans and non-binary people. So yeah, funcrunch.org/blog. I have a links page on there, and we'll put the link up for that. Thanks again for asking.
Okay. So I think I'd like to call it there. I hope some other questions are coming up, but let's, is it a quick one, Phil?
Hi, thank you for your presentations. Herb, Dr. Herb, Dr. Herb, I really found what you were talking about when you were saying, like, what was like to have the children seeing the difference in their lives and all these things. And I'm imagining, I came from a pretty liberal place, but then lived in a conservative Eastern Oregon for many years and got a lot of challenging ideas bumping up against each other. And I'm trying to imagine having to present what you would have to do to say, like, here's a child, and this child's unhappy as he, she, or they are, and would benefit from being able to have their gender change, and trying to present that to maybe mainstream America as a doctor and not be thought of as, all the labels that they might assume. And so, but it seems very powerful to be able to try and share those children's experience, but then it would seem also exploitative to potentially use those children. So I was wondering if you had any specific methods that were useful in being able to engage the people in that regard.
Well, actually, the kids themselves don't feel it's exploitative. Barbara Walters, who I have other difficulties with, did a wonderful program with a kid named Jazz about 5 years ago. And people wondered about what this would mean for Jazz's life. It was very clear that Jazz, born a boy, was a girl. Jazz is now a 13-year-old activist. And I think there's a role to be played. Obviously, you don't put kids on television who want to protect their privacy. We would never do that. And the battle, I've been in this field a long time. The battlegrounds have been much on the other side, and they are now swinging to the point where, at least if you operate on the coast in north of North Carolina on the East Coast and north of Orange County, perhaps on the West Coast, up all the way up to Seattle. The paper I have, the study of how well these kids do, came out of University of Washington. It's a very gratifying place to be right now. And I don't, what I like about having good data and studies that I can present in detail is it's hard to push back. This is not my opinion. This is what happens to these kids. Does that mean you want to cut my throat? Okay, I hope that answers your question. We should get the other people.
I really hate having to cut things short. There's so much rich material to discuss here, but we do have another guest that we want to leave plenty of time to talk with. So I am wondering, should we just keep going? Are we okay with that? Or do you feel like you need a 3 or 4 minute break? Why don't you raise your hand if you feel like you really need a break now? Okay, so thank you so much to our panel. Can you stand up, Chris, and Herb in the back? Dan, why don't you come up and join me? I'm going to switch sides just for fun, inspired by the screen going up and down. I want to get some exercise myself. So, here. Is that going to be comfortable? We also have shorter stools as well. If okay. So press the bottom. No, there's a button.